Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. And may the peace, mercy, and blessings of Allah be upon you. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are undertaking an intense and I think a deeply rewarding exploration into the 58th chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Mujaadila, which translates to the Pleading Woman. And this surah is, well, it's widely regarded as so much more than just a historical text from the early days in Medina. It's really a foundational blueprint, for social justice, for personal conduct, and for spiritual integrity that actively redefine the relationship between the creator and the creation.
It truly did. It's a game changer.
And our goal today is to go beyond just a surface level summary. We're basing this deep dive on a pretty extensive analysis, a synthesis, really, of over 50 renowned Sunni Tafsir and authentic hadith sources. We've pulled insights from giants like Ibn Kathir, Al-Qurtubi, Al-Tabari, and then verified the context through collections like Sahih al-Bukhari. Our mission is to extract those universal, timeless lessons that are embedded in these sources, the things that really transcend the original context and apply to every believer today, so you can walk away truly well-informed.
And, before we even unpack the very first verse, we absolutely have to acknowledge something extraordinary. It's an almost miraculous linguistic singularity that defines this surah, and really it sets the stage for its entire message.
Okay.
Surah Al-Mujaadila is the only chapter in the entire Quran, the one and only exception, where the name of Allah appears in every single one of its 22 verses.
Wait, every single verse, without exception?
Every single one.
That's incredible. That sounds less like a stylistic accident and much more like an intentional, profound theological marker placed right at the heart of the text.
Oh, it is absolutely intentional. It functions as the ultimate reinforcement of divine omnipresence, what we call ma'iyya ilmiya.
Togetherness in knowledge.
Exactly. It's a constant rhythmic reminder that Allah is present, that He is aware, and that He is actively involved in all human affairs, without any exception. So whether those affairs are seemingly trivial, a private domestic dispute, or these immensely grand matters of public order and theological allegiance, the divine witness is constant.
That sets such an incredibly high bar for human accountability, doesn't it?
It does.
And what's truly fascinating is how the surah immediately demonstrates this concept. It moves so seamlessly from an intensely intimate, private, domestic dispute, the complaint of Khawlah bint, which gives the surah its name, to regulating these massive public and community issues like secret councils, the Najwa, and defining the very boundaries of loyalty, Hizbullah. It instantly tells the listener that the private sphere is never, ever truly divorced from the spiritual one.
Never. The two are interwoven.
Okay, let's unpack this opening. It provides the pivotal narrative framework for the entire surah. Khawlah bint Thalaba and her husband Az bin Asamit. The sources describe Az as an elderly man, often struggling with anger or sudden rash outbursts. Help us understand the crisis that unfolded in their home.
Well, the crisis revolved around a pre-Islamic custom known as Zihar. Az, in one of these fits of temper, he pronounced the customary formula: "You are to me as the back of my mother."
Okay, to a modern listener, that sounds strange, maybe offensive, but ultimately kind of meaningless.
Right. But in the pre-Islamic Jahiliyyah, the period of ignorance, those words carried a devastating legal weight.
What exactly did that utterance mean for Khawlah? I mean, legally and socially?
It was an act of profound, irrevocable injustice. It effectively rendered Khawlah a non-person.
Wow.
See, Zihar was considered an immediate and permanent, though incomplete, separation. It absolutely banned the husband from having any marital relations with his wife, yet, and this is the cruel part, it did not dissolve the marriage contract.
So she was stuck.
Completely stuck. It left her in this horrific legal and social limbo. She was neither a wife, so she couldn't claim marital rights or support, nor was she a free divorcee, able to remarry or seek a new life.
It was, in essence, a sentence of slow, painful social death, eternally bound to a man who had just discarded her.
That's it, exactly.
That's just heartbreaking. The injustice is so palpable. And Khawlah, despite the terrifying implications of challenging tradition, she refused to accept that verdict silently. She took her case directly to the highest legal authority, the Prophet Muhammad.
And that's the key narrative moment. Khawlah went to the Prophet and she pleaded her case. The Prophet, at first, he was bound by the existing, though deeply flawed, Arab custom. So he told her, based on that customary law, that she appeared to be unlawful to him.
And she didn't accept that.
Not at all. The sources describe a heated, passionate, tearful plea from Khawlah. She wasn't just asking for mercy, she was arguing for justice. She argued that Oz had consumed her youth, they'd raised children together, and now that she was old, infirm, and without any means, he was casting her aside using this cruel, outdated formula.
So when the prophet couldn't offer any immediate relief based on those human-made customs.
She turned her face to the heavens, and she cried out her grief and her loneliness directly to the Creator.
And what follows immediately in verse 1 is just the staggering response. The sheer immediacy of divine response, the Istijabah, is unprecedented.
It is truly revolutionary. The verse begins, "Indeed, Allah has heard the statement of her who disputes with you concerning her husband and complains to Allah." Just imagine that. The highest authority in the universe intervenes instantly to adjudicate a woman's complaint against an oppressive, male-centric tradition.
It establishes a doctrine that no grievance is too insignificant for the all-hearing, all-seeing God.
Exactly. It teaches us that Allah is not some passive, distant deity. He is an active participant in our lives, validating Khahlah's complaint from above the seven heavens. It fundamentally redefines the believer's relationship with the Creator, moving it from remote awe to intimate reliance.
I find the choice of words in the Quran itself incredibly important here. It uses the word tuyadiluka.
She disputes with you.
Yes, she disputes with you, addressing the prophet himself. This isn't a description of meek, quiet supplication. It's a description of active, verbal appeal, of challenging the status quo.
That is a crucial insight into the dignity of women that's being enshrined in this moment. I mean, in almost any ancient civilization, a woman challenging a religious leader or any form of high male authority would have been considered the height of insolence, a disregard for order.
Of course.
Yet, the Quran not only records Khahlah's act of disputing, it memorializes her voice. It essentially sanctifies her right to appeal, her right to seek justice and to challenge interpretations of custom that deny fundamental human rights.
She insisted there had to be a better answer.
She did. The sources confirm she understood what the prophet was saying, but she insisted God must have a better answer. Her persistence itself is elevated as a virtue.
And the power of this moment resonated so deeply that it changed how the most powerful men in the nascent Islamic State viewed the authority of women's voices. Let's talk about that famous anecdote, the one involving the second caliph, Umar ibn al-Khattab.
Oh, this story is just foundational to understanding the immediate societal impact. So years later, when Umar was the powerful caliph of this vast empire, he's walking with his companions, and he's stopped by an elderly woman in the street. It's Khawlah, now recognizable by her status as the Pleading Woman. She proceeds to lecture him at length about his governance, his responsibilities to the poor, his fear of God, pausing his entire entourage.
And his companions got impatient.
They did. They tried to intervene, to rush him along, and Umar sternly rebuked them. He famously said, "Woe to you! Do you not know who this is? This is Khawlah, whose speech was heard by Allah from above the seven heavens. By Allah, if she stood here until nightfall, I would not leave until she finished her counsel."
Wow, that anecdote is so powerful. It shows that a woman's voice, once it's validated by God and the Quran, immediately commanded the deepest respect from the highest earthly authorities, irrespective of her social status or age.
Precisely. It institutionalized the idea that merit and piety, confirmed by the divine word, supersede all temporal power and social hierarchy. And to bring this back to the theological anchor, we have the account from Aisha, the prophet's wife, which really drives home the reality of Al-Sami, the all-hearing.
Yes, her observation is so crucial for grasping muraqabah, mindfulness.
Aisha remarked that she was standing right there in the corner of the house, and she couldn't hear or fully make out some of Khahlah's whispered complaints, because of Khahlah's weak voice and Aisha's own limited human hearing. Yet, Aisha stated, "Blessed is he whose hearing encompasses all things. I could not hear some of what she said, yet Allah heard her from above the seven heavens."
That contrast between human limitation, the difficulty of hearing a nearby whisper, and divine perfection is just. It's meant to profoundly affect the believer.
It is. It reminds us that our most private whispers, our prayers, our worries, even our sins are not just recorded somewhere. They are fully instantaneously heard. That is the true meaning of omnipresence.
So Allah not only validated the complaint, but issued a clear legal ruling in verse 2 that abolished the custom of Zihar. This is where tradition is subjected to rational truth and justice.
Absolutely. The Quran dismantles centuries of cultural superstition with a simple, powerful, rational argument. Those among you who pronounce Zihar to their wives, they are not their mothers. Their mothers are only those who gave birth to them.
It's just plain logic.
It exposes the logical absurdity and the inherent falsehood of the husband's claim. A rash verbal declaration, born of anger, cannot alter the biological and emotional reality of lineage or the sanctity of the marital bond. And this teaches a critical lesson. Deeply ingrained, oppressive cultural practices must always be subjected to the scrutiny of objective truth, reason, and divine justice. And if they fail that test, they must be demolished.
I want to spend a moment on the moral weight of words here. The way the Quran categorizes the act of the Zihar is incredibly instructive about verbal abuse.
It's elevated far beyond a simple breach of contract. The utterance of Zihar is categorized as Munkar objectionable or evil, and Zur falsehood or lie.
That's a major sin.
A major sin. This classification makes it clear that verbal abuse using degrading language or equating one's wife to an unmarriageable relative to shame or cast her aside is an act of aggression against her dignity and against the marital contract itself. It emphasizes that words are not just air. They carry legal, spiritual, and moral weight, and they cannot be withdrawn without serious consequence.
Yet, despite the severity categorized as evil, the verse concludes with a profoundly merciful statement. And indeed, Allah is oft pardoning, oft forgiving.
And this encapsulates that beautiful balance of justice and mercy that's so inherent in Islamic reform. The objective of the law revealed here isn't just to punish the husband or to permanently destroy the family unit. The goal is rehabilitation.
Right.
By offering a structured path to forgiveness and expiation, the Kaffarah, the Qur'an, aims to heal the spiritual wound caused by the rash act. It allows for the rectification of even grave domestic errors through sincere repentance and mandatory corrective action.
Okay, let's delve into those corrective measures. The Kaffarah, the penalties, detailed in verses 3 and 4. Because this is where the social and spiritual engineering truly shines. The penalties are hierarchical. What is the primary and most significant step required for expiation?
The required penalty for the husband who wishes to return to his wife is, first and foremost, the freeing of a slave, irrevocable, before they touch one another.
That's a stunning example of social engineering.
It is. The penance for a private domestic sin, a crime rooted in pride, anger, and verbal abuse, is directly linked to social emancipation and public good. The law teaches that true personal redemption requires striking at the root of social inequality. It compels the offender to perform the profound act of liberating a human being from bondage. It forces a redirection of the offender's wealth toward a greater communal good.
And if the offender, like many in early Medina, was unable to free a slave, what was the next level of discipline?
The second level targets the internal discipline of the individual. It recognizes that Zihar is often a crime of passion and a lack of impulse control. So the penalty is a fast for 2 months consecutively.
2 consecutive months, that's intense.
It's an intense exercise in mastering one's lower self, the nafs. It enforces self-control, reflection, and it breaks the cycle of uncontrolled anger that led to the injustice in the first place. And jurisprudentially, the commentators often highlight the requirement for consecutive fasting.
Yeah.
If you miss a single day, you have to start all over. That rule underscores the seriousness and commitment required for spiritual purification.
And the final, most flexible level, for the genuinely weak or destitute.
If one is too old, or too weak, or genuinely incapable of enduring that demanding fast, perhaps due to poverty that makes continuous fasting impossible, the penalty is the feeding of 60 poor persons.
So everyone has a path to redemption.
Everyone. This ensures that even the poorest offender is able to rectify his wrong, and it structurally redirects his personal resources toward the most vulnerable in society. The sin committed in the privacy of the home is ultimately purified through tangible acts of welfare and charity in the public sphere.
That brings us back to the practical application of the law, the ruksha, or accommodation, which is demonstrated so beautifully by the Prophet's action toward Oz.
It shows the compassion that's embedded in the law. When the Prophet outlined this list of penalties, Khawlah herself intervened again.
The wronged party.
The wronged party. And she pointed out that Oz was too destitute to free a slave, too old and weak to sustain the fast, and too poor to even afford the food for 60 people. She confirmed his poverty.
So what happened?
Instead of ruling that Oz remained condemned, the Prophet accommodated this human frailty. He assisted Oz by providing one large basket of dates and a rock. And Khawlah, despite being the one who was wronged, contributed another. They jointly fulfilled the penalty of feeding the poor.
That's a profound lesson in communal responsibility and compassion. The community, and even the wronged individual, shares the burden to help the sinner return to righteousness.
Yes, instead of crushing them under the weight of the law.
So we see the law acting as a scaffold for spiritual growth and societal repair, rather than pure retribution.
Exactly. And verse 4 solidifies the connection for the believer. It links strict adherence to these family laws, the hudud, the divine limits, directly to core belief, to aqidah. It says that is so that you believe in Allah and His Messenger. Those are the limits of Allah.
So being a true believer isn't an abstract identity.
Not at all. It's not a theological concept you study in isolation. It's a practical commitment to upholding justice, respect, and divine limits in every single personal dealing, from the grandest legal matter to the most intimate domestic argument.
The Sutta makes a significant pivot now, moving from the microscopic view of domestic justice to these macroscopic issues of community security and theological opposition. In Medina, the burgeoning Muslim state faced constant opposition, not just from external enemies, but often from the internal plotting of the munafiqun, the hypocrites, and other hostile factions. The Sutta addresses these opposers directly in verses 5 and 6.
This section addresses the psychological state of the community when it's facing organized antagonism. The concept of kubitu is introduced.
Which means?
Those who oppose Allah and His Messenger are disgraced, curbed, or humbled, just as those nations before them were disgraced. This serves as a psychological anchor for the early believers. It provides a sense of historical determinism and confidence.
So the idea is that opposition to divine truth is inherently futile.
Yes. Regardless of the temporary power or resources of the enemies, it reassures the persecuted that the downfall and humbling of their oppressors are inevitable. It's a pattern established throughout history.
And running parallel to that external warning is a profound internal psychological insight about the nature of memory and accountability in verse 6. Allah has enumerated it while they forgot it.
This is what we call the asymmetry of memory, and it's a terrifying yet necessary concept. Human beings are constantly prone to ghafla, heedlessness. We perform sins, especially those committed in private or those that seem inconsequential, and we quickly forget them.
Right. We assume time or distance or even our own good deeds have somehow erased the record.
We do. But the divine record is impervious to the erosion of time and forgetfulness.
So what's the practical implication for us today, living in an age where everything feels so ephemeral?
It demands the absolute necessity of rigorous self-audit. Muhasabah. You can't rely on your own faulty, self-serving memory to gauge your spiritual standing. You have to constantly seek sincere repentance, tawbah, for both the sins you consciously remember and critically for the multitude of sins and failings that your human mind has simply forgotten.
That knowledge that everything is enumerated should drive a higher level of ethical conduct.
In every private interaction.
This theme of enumeration leads us directly to the theological anchor of this entire surah, which is verse 7, the doctrine of ma'iyya ilmiyah, divine togetherness in knowledge. This concept fundamentally states that absolute privacy is an illusion.
It is the ultimate regulator of the private conscience. The verse asks the listener to consider any secret counsel. There is in no private conversation 3, but that he is the 4th of them, nor are there 5, but that he is the 6th of them.
That powerful numerical progression.
Yes. It emphasizes that no matter the size or configuration of a secret meeting, whether it's physical or, digital, Allah is the unseen attendee. He is with them in terms of His encompassing knowledge, His hearing, and His perfect awareness.
Let's elaborate on the practical, daily implications of cultivating this awareness. I mean, beyond just being aware, how does this regulate behavior in modern life?
Well, in a modern context where so much plotting and gossiping and financial corruption happens via encrypted chat or behind closed doors, this doctrine is crucial. If you're sitting in a professional meeting and you're contemplating a dishonest or harmful decision, the awareness that the all-knowing God is listening, not just philosophically, but immediately, it prevents that action.
So laws and professional codes of conduct can only go so far.
Exactly. They can regulate public actions up to a point, but only the consciousness of the all-knowing God can effectively regulate private, undocumented conduct. It means your integrity is tested most severely when you believe you are completely alone.
It also seems to serve a profound dual purpose. It's both a terrifying warning and a source of immense comfort.
Absolutely. For the hypocrites and conspirators, those who actively seek to plot and undermine the community, the idea that their deepest, most private secrets are being recorded for a day of reckoning is a powerful, intrinsic deterrent. However, for the believer who feels isolated or oppressed or lonely, maybe facing an injustice that no one else sees, this doctrine is the ultimate spiritual fortification. It means you are never truly alone. Your plight, your pain, your prayers are fully known and registered by the most powerful being in existence.
This consciousness of the divine presence takes us directly to the ethics of najwa, or secret counsel, in verses 8 through 10. The surah acknowledges that secret communication is sometimes necessary, but it introduces a strict moral categorization.
It's a beautifully nuanced piece of social legislation. The Qur'an establishes that secrecy itself is not inherently bad, it's just a method. It's the content and the intent of the conversation that determines its morality.
Okay, let's look at the forbidden category first.
Forbidden najwa is any counsel centered on three destructive categories. Itham, which is sin, udwan, which is aggression or hostility, and masiyat ar-rasul, disobedience to the messenger, implying disregard for divine law.
This was the behavior of the hypocrites in Medina.
It was, plotting against the believers' security, their economy, their reputation. It's a warning against any private conversation, professional or personal, whose sole intent is malicious destruction.
And what about the commended form of najwa?
Commended najwa is conversation centered on righteousness and taqwa piety. Privacy is often essential for strategic planning for the good of the community, for sensitive acts of private charity that avoid boastfulness, or maybe most importantly, for reconciling estranged parties, islah.
So if the conversation is constructive,
If it's aimed at improving individual or collective well-being, it's commended. The key lesson remains. The technique of secrecy is neutral. The morality is entirely determined by its righteous or destructive content.
now, verse 10 adds a powerful layer to this. It identifies malicious whispering as a direct psychological weapon used by Satan.
This is the psychology of exclusion, and it's relevant in every social setting, from the mosque to the workplace. Satan's primary goal, through forbidden najwa, is explicitly stated: to cause grief to the believers.
And we've all seen this.
Of course.
Yeah.
Exclusionary whispering in a public gathering, a small group huddled together sharing secrets and laughing. It creates immediate anxiety, paranoia, and sadness in those who are visibly left out. It fractures social cohesion and trust.
And this is why the Prophet Muhammad explicitly prohibited two people from whispering in the presence of a third who can't participate.
Yes, because it's an act of emotional harm and disrespect.
So if a believer is the target of this malicious whispering, this calculated act to cause anxiety, what is the spiritual antidote to prevent the paranoia that results from it?
The antidote is tawakkul, trust in God. The verse immediately reassures believers, but he cannot harm them in the least except as Allah permits. The believer is encouraged to develop an inner resilience.
So you don't become obsessed with what others are plotting.
Right. We must not allow ourselves to become paralyzed by the intrigues, rumors, or machinations of others. The knowledge that ultimate power, permission, and control rests entirely with Allah, not with the most cunning conspirators, liberates the believer from fear and anxiety. We have to focus on our own actions and our relationship with God, rather than being distracted by the shadows cast by others.
We transition now from the secrecy of private plotting, the najwa, to the openness of public conduct and etiquette in assemblies, or majalis. Verse 11 introduces a social rule that seems so simple, yet it carries this immense spiritual weight.
It's a crucial transition because the way a community physically arranges itself, the principles that dictate who gets a seat and who doesn't, is a direct reflection of its underlying spiritual and social values.
Tell us the context for verse 11.
The context, as reported by the commentators, centers on the Prophet's mosque. It often served as the community center, the court, the educational hub. So it's frequently crowded. The issue arose when highly respected figures, particularly the veterans of the Battle of Badr, would arrive. The Prophet would sometimes request companions who were already seated to move and make space for these honored guests.
And some were reluctant.
Exactly. Some companions, comfortable in their spots, were reluctant or just too slow to comply. This reluctance exposed a subtle selfishness, a kind of scarcity mindset.
So the command was revealed. O you who have believed, when you are told, make space in assemblies, then make space. Allah will make space for you.
This is the principle of tafasu, mutual accommodation.
Yes. And it elevates the simple physical act of scooting over, of yielding one's comfort to accommodate another, and transforms it into a spiritual virtue. Socially, it directly combats that scarcity mindset, which believes that comfort is finite and must be hoarded. Making room is an essential act of inclusivity.
It sends a clear social signal.
A very clear signal that says, you belong here, your presence is valued, and the collective comfort is more important than my individual comfort. It's a fundamental training exercise in selflessness. And the spiritual reward promised for this small act, yafsa Allahu lakum, Allah will make space for you, it's expansive. How do the commentators view this promised expansion?
The commentators detail this reward as magnificent and multi-layered. It applies to both this life and the hereafter. It refers to a practical expansion in one's worldly provision, the risk. More profoundly, it refers to an expansion in the sadr, the chest meaning inner peace, contentment, spiritual tranquility.
And in the hereafter?
In the hereafter, the reward is expansion in the grave, making it spacious and comfortable, and ultimately, an expansive, privileged space in paradise. It teaches a universal principle. Generosity with space and comfort, when it's driven by goodwill, is always repaid with vastly expansive spiritual and material generosity from the Creator.
Immediately following the command about physical accommodation, the surah introduces a radical new social structure.
This is one of the most powerful declarations in the entire Qur'an, concluding verse 11. Allah will raise those who have believed among you and those who were given knowledge by degrees. This establishes a foundational Islamic meritocracy.
So what are the two pillars of this new social hierarchy?
They are iman, faith, encompassing piety and genuine conviction, and ilm, knowledge, meaning beneficial, sacred, and worldly knowledge.
And this declaration was truly revolutionary in 7th century Arabia.
Absolutely. Social stratification was primarily based on lineage, tribal power, or material wealth. This verse supersedes all previous criteria, declaring that the highest rank and honor in the sight of God belongs to those with sincere belief and those who actively pursue and utilize knowledge.
So the pursuit of knowledge isn't just an intellectual exercise, it's a means of spiritual and social elevation.
Correct. The community is directed to honor scholars and facilitate learning, recognizing that the difference between the knowledgeable and the ignorant isn't merely intellectual, it's spiritual and existential. The degrees of elevation promised here aren't fleeting social titles, they are ranks determined by God Himself.
Okay, moving on to verses 12 and 13, we encounter one of the most intriguing and famously short-lived legislative rulings in the Qur'an, the charity of consultation.
Ah, yes. This was a temporary ruling that required the believers to present an offering of charity, sadaqah, before engaging in a private consultation, a najwa, with the messenger. And the commentators agree that this was less about fundraising and entirely about establishing a specific test of sacrifice and sincerity for the community.
Why was this ruling necessary? I mean, what did it achieve?
During certain periods in Medina, the Prophet was being besieged by people. Some had genuine inquiries, but many had frivolous, mundane, or time-wasting questions. So this ruling acted as a crucial legislative filter. The primary goal was educational, to emphasize the enormous value of the Prophet's time, which was essentially the time of divine revelation and guidance.
So access to that kind of leadership should be approached with seriousness.
Exactly. With seriousness, respect, and a willingness to sacrifice personal resources. The minor cost deterred those who were just curious or seeking to waste time, ensuring that only those with genuine spiritual, communal, or pressing legal needs were prioritized.
And how did the community respond to this test?
Well, the historical sources present a pretty sobering picture of human nature. Most companions failed the test.
Really?
Yes. They were unwilling or unable to pay the required charity before consulting. They immediately held back, reluctant to spend their wealth. It really demonstrated the power of miserliness over spiritual eagerness.
It is often noted that only one companion consistently acted upon this verse during its brief period of effect.
Yes. Ali ibn Abi Talib is celebrated for his zeal for immediate implementation and his sincerity. Sources report he was virtually the only companion to act upon this. He had a single dinar, and he reportedly exchanged it for 10 dirhams, ensuring he gave a dirham in charity for every single question he needed to ask the Prophet.
And that action cemented his reputation.
It did. For prioritizing spiritual inquiry and seriousness over material possession, it demonstrated the very sincerity this ruling sought to inspire.
But the ruling was quickly abrogated as mercy. If it was so important, why was it lifted so fast?
The ruling was lifted very quickly. Some accounts say within hours or a day, before many could even act on it, because it proved too burdensome for the genuinely poor companions. The ones who truly needed immediate access to guidance, but just couldn't afford the charity. The abrogation itself provides one of the most fundamental lessons in Islamic jurisprudence and mercy.
Which is?
That Allah does not burden a soul beyond its capacity. Islamic legislation provides relief, a rukhsah. So while the intent of the law to instill seriousness and respect was vital, the practical application created a barrier for the needy. So the physical obligation was removed.
But the spirit of the law remains.
Exactly. The spirit remains. We should always approach seeking knowledge, spiritual guidance in the presence of leaders with reverence, respect, and generosity of spirit, even if the legal obligation to give money is removed. The lesson is about sincerity and valuing guidance, not about wealth.
We wrap up the surah by moving from societal etiquette to the monumental crisis of identity and allegiance, focusing on the internal threat to the community, the hypocrites, or munafiqun. Verse 14 describes them in very stark terms.
The surah paints a devastating portrait of moral and spiritual confusion. It describes the hypocrites as those who make allies of people with whom Allah is angry.
Essentially allying with the open enemies of the faith.
Right. And this highlights their fundamental crisis of identity. The Qur'an states, "They are neither of you believers nor of them disbelievers." They exist in a state of spiritual fluctuation. They lack the moral courage to be open disbelievers, but they also lack the genuine conviction to be true believers.
It sounds like a painful psychological state to be in.
It is the ultimate lack of integrity. Being two-faced ultimately leads to a loss of self and a loss of true belonging in both camps. The life lesson here is crucial. Integrity requires clear, unwavering principles, regardless of the social cost. Fluctuating allegiance just means one has surrendered their identity to convenience and fear.
Their primary tool for maintaining this fluctuating status was their reliance on oaths, which the surah calls a shield.
Yes. They mastered the use of oaths swearing by Allah as a shield, a junah, to protect themselves from scrutiny and preserve their social standing within the Muslim community, all while secretly plotting against it.
A severe warning.
An eternal warning against using religion, or religious symbols like solemn oaths, as a cover for treachery, corruption, or moral cowardice. And the surah quickly emphasizes the utter futility of relying on material possessions or family ties for protection, warning that their wealth and children will never avail them against the penetrating scrutiny of Allah.
Their spiritual delusion, particularly about their oaths, is described as lasting even until the day of judgment. That speaks to a terrifying breakdown of reality.
That is the terrifying psychological end stage, the liar's delusion. The surah depicts the hypocrites swearing false oaths to Allah on Judgment Day, precisely as they did to people in this life. They believe their own lies, and they assume they can deceive the all-knowing God on the Day of Reckoning. It indicates that their hypocrisy has become so deeply embedded, so much their second nature, that it has entirely destroyed their conscience and their connection to objective spiritual reality. It's a chilling portrayal of how persistent conscious sin destroys the moral compass of the human soul.
Following this psychological profile, the surah moves to define the party of Satan, his shaitan. What is the single common thread that defines membership in this destructive party?
The defining trait is ghaflah, forgetfulness or heedlessness. Verse 19 states the foundational flaw. Satan has overcome them and made them forget the remembrance of Allah. And this establishes a critical, inescapable causal chain.
Let's break down that chain.
It starts with the neglect of dhikr, the remembrance of Allah, meaning conscious connection and invocation. That neglect creates a spiritual void, which leads directly to satanic domination, where one's thoughts and actions are guided by destructive impulses. This inevitably culminates in moral ruin and spiritual condemnation.
So the enemy attacks the spiritual fortress not by a frontal assault.
No, but by convincing the occupants to let down their guard and stop their constant watch.
So dhikr is the ultimate fortress of the believer.
Precisely. The life lesson is that the heart is never vacant. The moment one stops consciously connecting with, remembering, and invoking Allah, the heart becomes a vacant vessel, immediately occupied by satanic influence. To avoid being part of Hizb ash-Shaitan, one must maintain that consistent, active connection with the divine.
The surah then pivots dramatically, offering profound reassurance and optimism to the faithful. It establishes a powerful sense of historical trajectory in verses 20 and 21.
This is the divine decree of victory, or Istijabah. Allah has written, "I will surely overcome, I and my messengers." This statement is not a mere wish. It is an unshakable, historical, and eschatological promise. It provides profound, unshakable hope for the believer facing persecution or severe opposition.
It confirms that the ultimate trajectory of history is the victory of truth.
And the triumph of the moral argument, regardless of temporary setbacks.
How does that apply to a believer today who might feel overwhelmed by global injustice or personal struggles?
It shifts their focus from immediate tactical victories to ultimate strategic success. It means that the moral principles and the foundation of faith will survive and flourish, even if the enemies seem powerful now. It guarantees the success of the faith and the ultimate success of the believer in the hereafter. It is a source of sakina, or tranquility, confirming that their path is aligned with the eventual outcome ordained by the Creator.
Finally, we reach the conclusion, defining the ideal community. Hizbullah, the party of Allah, in verse 22, and the essential, difficult principle that dictates their actions.
This is the apex of loyalty, Allah wal bara, loyalty and disavowal. The verse states, "You will not find a people who believe in Allah and the last day having affection for those who oppose Allah and His messenger, even if they were their fathers or their sons or their brothers or their kindred."
That is the ultimate test of principle, requiring one to choose faith over blood ties.
It is the severest test of allegiance. This verse was revealed in the context of companions who had to face their own immediate relatives in battle. We remember examples like Abu Ubaidah, who faced his father, or Musab ibn Umair, who faced his brother, because those relatives were actively warring against the very foundation and security of the faith.
So the fundamental lesson is that muwada, heartfelt allegiance and love, cannot coexist with active, destructive opposition to divine command.
That's the core of it.
But doesn't this principle risk fracturing the family unit entirely? How do we balance this ultimate loyalty with the universal Islamic command to honor and respect parents and kin?
That is the necessary nuance provided by the sources. Al-Wara is primarily a principle of ideological alignment and active loyalty. It means you cannot join, support, or love the ideology or the actions of those actively trying to destroy the foundation of the faith. However, this does not negate kindness, good conduct, financial support, and respect toward non-hostile relatives who simply hold a different belief. The rule targets those who are actively opposing Allah and His messenger. The principles supersede lineage when that lineage becomes a direct threat to the truth.
For those who pass this ultimate test, what are the ultimate rewards of integrity promised to Hizbullah?
The rewards are comprehensive and threefold, confirming the holistic nature of their success. First, Allah inscribes faith firmly in their hearts, making their conviction unshakable against doubt or persecution. Second, they are supported with a divine spirit, a ruh from Him, which manifests as tranquility, sakina, and strength in the face of trial.
And the third?
The third is the ultimate success, mutual pleasure. The verse concludes, Allah is pleased with them, and they are pleased with Him. This state confirms that the journey from Khawlah's lonely personal struggle for domestic justice to the ultimate communal victory of Hizbullah is paved with unwavering remembrance, ethical conduct, and firm adherence to divine limits.
This deep dive into Surah Al-Mujaadila has truly been transformative. It confirms that the spiritual health of a community is built on the integrity of its smallest parts, the individual and the home. We began with the desperate plea of Khawlah, which spurred a revolution in domestic justice, validating the voice of the oppressed. We then traced the Surah's path through the importance of muraqabah, the pervasive presence of the all-hearing God in every conversation, the establishment of a community defined by knowledge and mutual accommodation to fasu, and finally the demand for absolute loyalty to principle, Hizbullah.
And if we synthesize this entire 22-verse journey, we have to return one last time to that unique singularity we opened with. The fact that Allah's name appears in every single verse of the surah, the entire chapter, with all its legal, social, and psychological reforms, is anchored by that singular, pervasive consciousness of the divine.
So the surah is essentially telling us, if you forget God in one area of your life, you forget Him in all.
That's it. That's the thread.
So what's the final provocative thought, the ultimate challenge for the listener?
The challenge for you, the learner, is to reflect on how often you consciously factor in the divine presence, that maya ilmiya, when making decisions that are unseen by human eyes. Whether you are having a private argument with your family, making a secret financial decision with a colleague, or sitting alone late at night plotting your next move. How often do you truly remember that the all-knowing God is not just aware, but is the unseen attendee? Integrating that constant awareness is the spiritual integrity the surah commands. That should be the highest form of self-audit in your daily life.
Jazakallah khaira. May Allah reward you with goodness for spending your valuable time listening to us.